Welcome to Communicating Cyber, the series where cybersecurity leaders go beyond the jargon to share their stories, strategies, and real-world lessons that earn trust and gain buy-in for your security program. I'm Robin Oldham, founder of Cydia, and I've spent 2 decades helping organizations defend themselves against cybercrime and thrive in a digital world. From advising boards during crises to shaping long-term strategy, I've seen just how powerful the right conversation can be. In each episode, we explore how CISOs and cyber leaders tackle one of the industry's biggest challenges: communicating complexity in a way that's clear, compelling, and connects with people. This is your space to learn, share, and be inspired by your peers. Today, we're joined by Nisha Patel, Chief Information Security Officer at Ocorian, a global leader in corporate and fiduciary services. Nisha brings over 20 years of expertise in cybersecurity, network architecture, and digital transformation, making her a true authority in the field. Nisha, so glad to have you on today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to be here.
Lovely. And so, Nisha, we always start with a little bit about background. What's your journey to kind of becoming a CISO been like?
I started off with engineering from help desk all the way through to network engineering, server engineering, moved into architecture, into then delivery space, and then into finding the CISO role. But I've worked across various different organizations such as public sector, private sector, food transport, and then finally into financial services.
Cool. So a real variety of both kind of vertical kind of sectors that you've been in, but also different teams and kind of coming from quite a technical background. I'm sure that knowledge has been useful in your journey to understanding cyber and how to secure organizations as well.
Absolutely. I think it helps when you can relate to the teams that are actually doing the work on the ground, being able to help when there's an incident, being able to understand the technical side of it. It kind of helps give that reassurance almost. And then you can then translate that into the business field that you need to be able to then talk to the board, to be able to give them the reassurance that they require.
Gotcha. So you've already got that kind of built-in technical credibility, which you can then use to kind of build that trust with your audience.
Absolutely.
So jumping maybe a little bit in at the deep end, but kind of what techniques do you use to land your messages or tell your stories and kind of influence those stakeholders and drive security culture? What have you found really works for you over those 20 years?
So I think it's a real mix. I think I've worked in organizations where people dreaded talking to security when you were going over to them to talk about their design and you were doing the security approvals, all the way through to now actually being the person on the ground saying, right, we need to do our security awareness training. How do we improve our metrics? How do we ensure we can, respond to incidents? So I've learned there's a real mix of understanding and appreciation for security. Some people would absolutely dread it. They don't want to have anything to do with it. Other people are intrigued by it. So I think finding the balance in the organization is important. Anyone that's working on a day-to-day basis will need to understand how their involvement in security, their awareness is important. So being able to relate to, if you click on this phishing email, how does it actually relate to an incident that could potentially happen and could impact the business? But when you're talking to the board, it's about the investment in this area will help us protect us in an area which they might want to move into. For example, everyone wants to move into the air automation space. So actually, how do we invest in the right spaces to allow the business to do what they want to do? So I do have to tailor what messaging I'm giving to which audience.
Tailoring was the word that sprung to mind as you were saying that. Yeah, it's really important then to make sure that you're relating I think the point about relating your message to their day-to-day role is really important as well, right?
Absolutely. So, for example, users will say, "Well, why do I have to do this user training all the time? Well, what is it that I'm going to do? I'm just one user." But I think ultimately, if you can relate it back to either incidents that have happened in the news or how their actions could, bring down an entire network, I think that really helps, and all of a sudden, it makes it real.
I've found that making it real really helps because otherwise it can be quite nebulous, right? It's not the same as, I suppose, to just take a direct parallel with physical security. You can see whether a door's locked or not. You can, I suppose, log in and have a look in the AWS dashboard, or you can run an API query to see whether your S3 bucket's exposed or not. But it's not the same as just, walking to the water cooler and seeing whether a door's open or something's on fire, right? So bringing it to life to people, I think is really important. And you touched a little bit there on kind of, as well as making it real for people, the intrigue that some people have. I've also seen a lot, in security where fear-based narratives are quite common. don't think personally, I don't think they're a good way to get people out, to engage long term. But I guess do you agree? And kind of how do you balance the need for urgency, where sometimes you do just need to kind of say, this is really important. We need to get on and do it quickly, and clarity, perhaps without resorting to the kind of FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that can be quite common in the security industry.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I've never used FUD during my time as a CISO, even through my security career. I think it probably causes the wrong behaviors. I think if you're going through using that, how often do you use it? Where do you draw the line? Where do you stop? I think it becomes then a vicious cycle of you've used it once and then almost you then feel like you have to use it every time. So when I'm talking to the Exco board or I'm talking to users, it'll be very much about let's think about how it impacts Ocorian. So if one user does one action, how does that impact our clients? How does it impact their data that we're protecting? Or how does it impact Ocorian, for example? I'll make it as real as possible, bring it back to actually how does it impact us, or try and relate it to stories of other organizations that might be similar size or operate in a similar industry to us, because then it becomes actually this could happen to us, rather than driving that fear of actually this risk could happen now, it's going to shut the whole organization down. So I think it is I've not used fear in that sense, but I think I will try to relate it back to, look, this has just happened in the news. This could be us. We could have done X, Y, and Z, and we could be impacted in the same way. So I think it is relate it back, make it as real as possible, and then try and use relevant stories. So more recently, the retail sector went through a number of incidents. Although we're not retail sector, the same principles apply to us in terms of, we could have been impacted by someone, resetting their credentials through the service desk. And actually someone could then have access as opposed to, trying to break in. It's about logging in. So I think, again, make it real. We are a business. We operate in the same way. The technology is the same underneath.
Okay, so use those real world examples to make it clearer to people, that it is that reality. It gives you that clarity. But then, I think I really like the idea of taking the principles behind that, kind of abstracting them away from the story, being, here's the example, here's what they could have done differently, here's what we could do differently, and kind of relating it back that way. Great. And is there a particular, we talked a little bit about retail sector there. Is there a particular breach or incident narrative that was a particular learning moment for you? Maybe it did go really well, or maybe you kind of look back in hindsight and go, oh, that was a bit awkward. That didn't really land as I'd hoped it was going to.
So I'd say, okay, so when I was in the engineering sort of area, I think that's when we had an issue that we hadn't really followed it through, thought it through, and it caused us a huge impact countrywide. And actually, had we taken sort of a bit more initiative and actually followed through the processes and stepped it through, discussed it with our, senior management at the time, we've had a much better outcome. We wouldn't have brought down an entire network over a 2-day period and run around the country, then, rebooting cryptos and all sorts.
Yeah.
I think here, if I kind of relate back to what, we just talked about in the retail sector, prior to that happening, I'd kind of gone to our CFO to discuss funding that I needed for an improvement. And actually, it was about, rather than saying, here's a 5x5 model, and I'm just going to say to you, I'm at risk 16 and everything's going to go wrong and the world's going to explode. It was actually about what is our income per day? And actually, if we were to suffer this incident without this additional capability that I require, what is the impact to the business? How long is it going to take me to get the business back up and running? What's our cyber RTO? And I made it very real, discussed that with the CRO and the CFO. And actually, the message landed so much better around, look, let's take the lessons for this. Let's understand what the impact could be to us if we don't have the additional capability, and then let's implement it. So it was very much let me think about how I can articulate it in a way that it lands with them.
Gotcha. So obviously making it real through, you talked there about quantifying the risk, and you could do that by, like you say, I guess putting, well, you said it yourself, the kind of revenue per day figure to, and especially if you're recovering from something, that objective is pretty clear. Then X times Y as an outcome, right?
Absolutely.
And was that also did that come to light? It almost sounds like you were kind of engaged in a bit of a pre-mortem rather than a post-mortem, right? Like, what would this incident look like, and what do we wish we'd done differently? Was that kind of part of the approach there that you're talking about?
Absolutely. So it was around ransomware is where I was going with that. So ultimately, I was preempting that if something went wrong, how bad would it be for us? How long would it take Ocorian to recover? We went through the steps. I came up with this is the cost per day. Finance were really good in providing me the figures I needed. I then came up with actually our burn rate would be this many days for us to recover. So the loss to business would be X amount. And ultimately from there, it's by putting the preventative capability in, this is actually how quickly we could recover. Off the back of that, our CFO did approve the additional spend. And then funny enough, 2 weeks later, we ended up with Scatterspider or the retail sector. And I think it was a moment of relief, for the board to say, we did the right thing, we invested in the right security technology. So I think, there was a little bit of I was just painting the picture of, I don't want this to happen on my book. So how do I help? And how do I get the right capability in place? Talked it through, discussed it to a point where it made sense. And off the back of that, we've also just done a red team event and a tabletop off the back of it to look at, well, actually, what is capability we put in? How has it helped us and how has it helped improve? But then I can take that back to Exco and say, look, we did additional investment. This is the reason we did it, in terms of the risk we were trying to reduce. And now having done the tabletop scenario, we can see that actually it has been worthwhile the investment.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So that sounds like a really, really mature approach there. So you've got the analysis work up front to understand what the impact actually is to your organization, and down to quite a granular detail, I suppose, but not. I really like the fact that you were speaking about going out and speaking to your finance colleagues and things like that. It's kind of not being in the security ivory tower, but actually we always talk about engaging colleagues around the business. It sounds like that was a really good exercise for you in making friends and influencing people around the business, right?
Absolutely. I think it is important for us not to be isolated, right? Everyone thinks that security is in the basement. And absolutely. Once upon a time, I did work in the basement as security. That did happen. But we don't do that anymore. And I think being able to work with our peers and be able to collaborate is really important, because ultimately, if we had an incident, I would be working with the business leads across the business. They would be supporting in terms of, communicating with our clients, helping us get back up and running. And, all the things that have to happen are not for security in isolation. It is really critical for us to all understand, but also being able to discuss with my peers actually what the impact would be if an incident happened, for them to understand their part and why it's so important. It makes it everyone's issue rather than just the security team.
Yeah, I think that's got to be a super important part of landing that message, right? It's never going to be all resting on your shoulders, right? It's a team sport, and having them bought in and understanding is really important. And that the second part of what you said a moment ago about doing an exercise afterwards to kind of, I suppose, partly to, I guess, understand and get some assurance that things have been implemented correctly, but also that kind of shaking out, are there any other things that we could have done or that we should have done differently or that we haven't thought about? Strikes me as a pretty good way of thinking about bringing your words, bringing new capabilities into a business, right?
Yeah, I think if we go back to why we're here talking about storytelling, right? If we can paint that picture end to end, and then it's about all the components go in between. So everyone talks about ransomware, and we talk about actually, are we protected? Are we ready? But then you build in the additional capability. Have you tested it out? It's great that we invest in tools, but then are we testing it? Does the team know how to respond in the event of an incident, for example? So where we brought the additional capability in, it was really important for us to then make sure the playbook's up to date. Is the plan up to date? Have we got our out of bounds channel if we need to do something, in the sense that we can't then use our primary channels, and then having an external assessor to make sure that they were almost looking at, how are we using the technology? How are the teams coming together? How is everyone working? Are the playbooks working? Do we need to make more improvements? I think the continuous learning and improvement is really important there, rather than we've done it, we've implemented it, let's forget about it. I think there needs to be that continuous drive of, let's review, let's improve as technology changes, as threats are changing. Is it threat led? Are we reviewing what's out there, the trends, or are we just going, okay, it's a tick box, we've done this, let's forget about it, move on?
Yeah, and I really like using kind of exercises, be them kind of slightly more hands-on or tabletop, there as a way of kind of closing the loop and kind of understanding whether things have worked or not. That, I think, often they get seen just as doing a fire drill, which is important in and of itself, but also that they are a crucial part, as you say, of that continual improvement, right? And actually what can we do differently? How can we improve? And using them on that kind of case by case rather than I think sometimes people get a bit hung up on doing the big kind of, we got a board incident response exercise, but they can be smaller, more tactical exercises, still involve a number of people and potentially some quite senior people, but focused around a particular scenario or a particular change that you've made to better understand it. I really like that, and I think that must be a really powerful tool in the toolbox as well.
I think so. I think the team feels that they're involved as well. So it's one thing for us to implement something, but then to test it out end to end, get everyone involved, for them to give their feedback, to say, you know what, that works, the playbook needs to be tweaked, or actually that hasn't quite landed as we expected, or absolutely pat on the shoulder, that's a bit of a relief. I think there's a lot of value in being able to bring everyone together and have that.
Yeah, it's almost like a training opportunity, right, as well,
Absolutely.
to embed that in the in the team as well. Cool. And so we talked a little bit then on the power, I suppose, of stories and that narrative that you're trying to build. How do you go about translating what must be some pretty complex security risks for Ocorian as a financial services business into stories that both the executive committee, the exco, and maybe the board as well above that, they're going to be filled with non-technical or non-subject matter experts, shall we say, technical in their own ways. How do you go about translating those complex security risks into stories that they can understand and act on?
I think it depends on the audience. We obviously mentioned that earlier. So I think obviously we are PE owned, and our owners are really knowledgeable, and we have some great partners within that space that understand technology, will understand the cyber threats itself. However, depending on the board, I will tailor what it is I'm trying to discuss, whether it's the strategy, whether it's this is our vision for the next few years and how do we get there? How do we then link that back to what we're trying to do for the business? What's the business strategy? So that'd be one side of it. But the other side of it, probably more that I've had opportunity this year, is where I was invited to speak at the Leadership Summit earlier this year. We actually created a series of videos. They were really fun in terms of, I'd come up with I just want to talk about phishing. I want to talk about physical security, or whatever the topic was, and the team came together and actually spent some time creating some videos that we then use as part of my presentation at the summit, and we were able to then kind of really bring it to life, make it a little bit more fun, but the message landed. I think that was really important. I obviously picked on members of Exco, we use them as a target. We did do some phishing campaigns against them, but it made it really real, because then I was able to go, we've sent a phishing email to Exco, we targeted very carefully. Unfortunately, some of them fell prior to them, some of them didn't, and some of them did the right thing and reported it. We then we use that, again, the story all the way through from, okay, if that member of Exco had clicked on that phishing link, what would have happened? And we played the journey through, again, through videos, through a bit of fun, a little bit of humor, but it landed, and actually everyone came away thinking, I get it, I understand why it's so important. And I think that was probably the first time I'd managed to do that in a way that just worked really well, rather than me just putting training up on SharePoint site or sending out a newsletter. So I think I've tried lots of different channels. I will continue to use lots of them, but the fun video series actually worked really well for me.
Gotcha. And was that just senior people, or was that kind of wider kind of management teams across the organization?
So that was all of Exco and Exco -1. So we have a leadership summit that we do early in the year. So about 80 of the top leaders in the company come together.
Okay, yeah. So quite a big group then, but we're also worth spending a bit of time to make sure,
absolutely,
prepare a couple of other assets and things that help, like you say, videos, those sorts of things that you can kind of land that message. Cool. And how did you handle those that unfortunately did fall for it? Was that I'm imagining it was probably quite human, but there must have been a couple of people that were embarrassed, I suspect. That's
absolutely
maybe something that people are a little concerned about, doing those sorts of things with senior individuals.
I think to be fair, I had a lot of confessions. Let's be very honest. People kept coming up to me afterwards going, oh, you know what, I clicked, it was me that clicked. But it's like, yeah, don't worry, I knew, I had the names. So we had a bit of a laugh about it. It wasn't we weren't going to beat anyone up about it. The point was to get the message across that this is why it's so important, and anyone can fall to it. It's not something that is only some people will click on, and it will just become part of day to day. It's actually, you could be in a rush to go home, you click on an email because it looks genuine, for example. So I think just not using the beating people up approach. I think it was let's make it really obvious. It's human. We make mistakes. We do have controls in place to reduce the amount of phishing attacks that come to us, but ultimately it will happen, especially when it's social engineering that's directed to people. The campaign that we use is very specific. We targeted our Exco members very specifically, and unfortunately some of them did fall for it. They did come to me for confessions, but it was also look, this is where the obvious telltale signs were. We talked it through as part of my presentation. I went through the actual scenario and said, look, I appreciate, this is how it came through, but think through the steps. Did you expect the email? The usual things that we in the security field will go through. And I kind of talked it through and made it, because I could discuss it from a real perspective of this had happened. They'd all seen the various emails. Some of them had clicked through it. They understood it. I think it was almost let's make it really human. We make mistakes, but this is the cost to the business if we make those mistakes. And this is why we need to be so aware. So it was almost an opportunity to kind of go through and use it as a training opportunity to do my presentation, which was great. So I think that really helped. I think in terms of, what they would do differently, a lot of them are much more aware now. Unfortunately, our rate of people coming to me directly has gone up significantly because they're all paranoid about clicking on links now. So, but it's fine. I'd rather have a culture of everyone's a bit more wary than they click on it.
Well, there's so many, you see posts on social media about, I wish I had more FaceTime with the board, or I wish I could get access to management, right? So
careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Oh, well, that sounds like it. Went really well, and I think that that human part is super important because, like you say, we are all human. We do make mistakes.
Agreed.
And I guess also, if your entire organization can be brought down by one person clicking one link in an email, then it probably says that you've not been doing a great job in trying to build some of those kind of some of that resilience, defense in depth, kind of various other kind of security principles, what access they need and where they need to know and those sorts of things as well, right?
Absolutely.
So is there sticking with the theme of kind of being human, what's the most human part of being a CISO that kind of surprises you, that people don't often see or that wouldn't immediately kind of spring to mind? If you could go back to yourself prior to getting a kind of CISO role, or years and years ago, what surprised you most about the human part of being a CISO?
I think people think that I won't make mistakes, and actually I'm not human. So the joke is, if we go anywhere outside of work for social drinks, if I've got my laptop on me, I will not let it out of my sight. It will stay with me at all times. So the joke would be about, well, if you lose your laptop, it's okay for us to lose ours. And it's very much as if I can't make any mistakes because I'm the CISO. But ultimately, we've all made mistakes. We all do it and we learn the hard way. But, for me, it's very costly. So I think it's don't make mistakes in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Think about, what it is, if you're clicking on something, if you're, replying to an email, or if, you're leaving your laptop lying around somewhere, or, any of those things. I think it's very much we're all human. We all make mistakes. And I think, we've all made them. But I think for me, it's I can't make mistakes. They all think, well, you're the CISO, you can't make those mistakes ever. Only we can. So I think it is about, we are all human.
Yeah, there's probably a very unhealthy place to be if you don't feel that you can ever make a mistake. And especially with, lots of people talking about burnout or kind of fatigue and feeling overwhelmed at times and things like that. I think, I can understand the need to give yourself a break. That doesn't mean be slapdash about things, which I think is what you were getting at. But you've got to kind of, you've got, I suppose, treat yourself and everyone fairly and in the same way, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. And if you had to, so I think that being human is obviously a really important part of it. Is there anything else? If you had to sum up what the cyber industry needs more of in just one word, what would that one word be, and why?
It'd be collaboration. I think we do lots of it, but there's lots more space to do more of it.
Gotcha. And is that collaboration on what sort of topics? Is that on everything? Is it in a particular area? Where would you kind of where would you focus that?
Across, I think across the board, I think we're seeing a lot more of it. So more recently, off the back of all the industry attacks within retail, I think we've seen a lot more organizations come together. And I appreciate you can't share everything because there's so much within an organization that can't be shared outside. But lots of the cyber leaders are coming together, having those discussions, and there's opportunity to support each other and be more open around what do you look out for, what do you protect the organization against, because ultimately, we do need to protect, UK economy or whatever economy it is that you're operating in. So I think there's been a lot more of that, and I think that's beginning to become more important to all of us, that we do collaborate, we do share information that we can share. Obviously you can't share everything, but what you can share is becoming more available.
Yeah, I think that's a good really good thing. I think it's sometimes, especially like you say, there are some things that you can and can't share between businesses, and you feel like you're in competition. But there's one competition that I think we can all agree on, which is we're the good guys and we're fighting the bad guys, right? So hopefully there's, like you say, plenty of scope there to share some of those, be they IOCs or kind of approaches, how people are kind of managing to what's working for them. And I guess that's part of what we're trying to do with this series as well. Share those things that are working and help everyone kind of up their game. Great. Any other kind of thoughts on, sticking with IOCs, tactics, techniques, or procedures that you think have landed particularly well in your kind of communication and collaboration journey?
I think be as open as possible. I think it's really important that the business isn't scared into doing things. I think that fear isn't a way to kind of drive that change in a positive way for culture. So for me, it's about being open. When there have been areas that we're concerned about, we send out comms from our from the security team to kind of make it really clear what is it that people should be aware of, why is the most important thing, and then how it relates back to our organization. So what is the risk to us and why we're preventing it.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Great. So I think if I were to kind of go back and think through, I feel free to add anything on the end here, but I think there are kind of three things in particular that stood out for me in our conversation today. One was it's really important to tailor things to your audience. You've got to make sure that works. Two, I really liked the power of exercising and how you were using it, not just as a kind of like, hey, let's run an exercise, but because we want to better understand our risk, or because we want to communicate the potential consequences with this group, or we want to use it as a training exercise for people. I think there's so many different aspects there that perhaps people don't immediately grasp when they kind of go, oh, we'll do an exercise. Tailoring, the power of exercising. And the third one I think really like about the being human. And you just mentioned it then, the kind of being open and not driving on fear, but satisfying that intrigue, I suppose, the why behind why things are important. Anything you'd add to those three? Do you think they're the kind of the main things, or have I missed anything? There's been a whole load of really useful things there.
I agree. I think those are the main things. I think it's once upon a time, security very much sat isolated in the basement somewhere, and people didn't worry about it, didn't think about it. But it is everyone's problem, and I think ultimately everyone in the organization takes responsibility for it. And then having that open communication both upwards and downwards, as well as amongst my peers, is really important. So I think being able to have very open dialogue and making sure people understand why is really important to me.
Great, wonderful. Thank you ever so much for your time today. Really appreciate you sharing your insights, some of those stories, and how you're approaching some really powerful, kind of clear human conversations about cybersecurity. That's it for this episode of Communicating Cyber. If this sparked an idea, challenged your thinking, or gave you something practical to take away, please subscribe. Please also check out Nisha's social media as well. She's often sharing useful things. Share this with your friends and colleagues, and let's keep the conversation going. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment or get in touch on LinkedIn. Until next time, thank you very much.